Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guests, Trish and Rob MacGregor. And they're here today to share with us their new book, Secrets of Spirit Communication, Techniques for Tuning In and Making Contact. Now, Trish has authored a dozen of novels and nonfiction books, and she's the co-author of the Sidney Omar series of astrology books with her husband, Rob. Together, they teach workshops on astrology and tarot. Now, Rob is a New York Times best-selling author of 20 novels and 18 nonfiction books in the New Age field. He also authored the Indiana Jones books, which we all love those movies. And he also authored The Prophecy Rock, which won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for mystery writing. He's worked with George Lucas, Peter Benchley, and Billy D. Williams, just to name a few. So let's welcome to the show Trish and Rob MacGregor.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, what a joy it is to have the both of you here. And, we were just talking. I love your book. My goodness. You've done such a beautiful job on this.
Thank you. We thought that the Llewellyn gave us a nice cover, too. So.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover. Absolutely beautiful. Well, and so when we look at spirit communication, gosh, there's a lot of different things out there. I loved how your book was laid out because it was really easy for the reader to go through and go, gosh, I'm not sure I know a whole lot about this, but I want to learn more. Is that who you intended this book for, or is it for anybody at any age of their spiritual evolution?
It's for everybody. Whether you've had contact or not, whether you're curious,
skeptical, or, but we talk about very early about the basics of spirit contact, about making contact. The first thing, very first thing is recognition. If you're so skeptical and don't believe that it's even possible to ever make contact or that there's even a spirit world, well, you're stopped right there. You're not going to get too far. But once you get past that, recognize the possibility, then there's the awareness. Just becoming open and aware that you could make contact. And throughout the book, we put in many different ways of how contact can be made, not just like a spirit manifesting in front of you. That's very rare. But we talk a lot about synchronicity, about contact through objects, animals. And so once you have that awareness, you make an intention. You actually say that you want to make contact. And sometimes spontaneous contact comes without doing that. But if you do make that intention, especially before you go to bed, it could come through a dream.
In fact, that's the most common way that people have spirit contact, through dreams.
Yeah. And then after you make that intention, you just give it some attention and then let it go, just no tension, and see what happens.
Well, it's interesting because, it's something that can definitely be developed, and we just have to pay attention. And I love how you talk in your book. You kind of really start off about talking about synchronicity and paying attention to that. So when we look at synchronicity, how big a part does that have in everything?
I think it's huge. A lot of times people, especially people who are skeptical or who don't believe in spirit contact, a synchronicity will seize your attention in such a way that, it's startling until you think, okay, maybe there is something to this, unless you just think that all coincidences are random, then it's hopeless.
We should give a definition of synchronicity for people who might not be so familiar with the term. So it's when similar inner and outer experiences come together outside of cause and effect. And the resulting coincidence that occurs is meaningful to the experiencer. In other words, it's a meaningful coincidence that occurs. You think about a friend who you haven't talked to since college, and suddenly you get an email or a text message or a Facebook introduction from that person within the next hour or two or something like that. And so that's that's a synchronicity, and it also could be telepathy as well, or precognition. We see synchronicity as like an umbrella over all these other aspects of psychic phenomena.
I think that's
so did Carl Jung.
Yeah. And then when we pay attention to those, it's really interesting what shows up. Do people usually see patterns, or what's kind of some of the normal things people see?
Well, let's just give an example of a story that happened to us. We were in contact with Whitley Strieber, who has a podcast, Dreamland. And on August 12th of 2015, somebody wrote me and said, "Did you know Whitley's wife Anne had died?" And I didn't. So I immediately wrote him and said, "Sorry I was to hear that she had passed." And all of a sudden, as I was writing to him, I said, "And please know," what I was going to say was, "know that we're here if we can do anything to help you." And at the moment I wrote "no," there was this tremendous crash, it was almost like a transformer blowing in our family room, which our two offices are off that family room. We both shot to our feet thinking that the TV had blown out or something weird.
It was very startling.
Yeah, it startled our dog off the couch. That's how loud it was.
And but yet we looked around and there was no visible source of what that where that sound
noise
came from.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote to Willie and I said, okay, just as I was writing to you and wrote the word "no," there was this huge magnet described what had happened, and he wrote back and he said. What I said to him, I said, maybe Anna's already stirring things up on the other side. And he replied, he says, "She sure is. She's here. You better believe it." And this was one of the most, it was a personal thing too, because we had been on their show and really liked Anne. And later on, we met Strieber in Central Florida. And he told us that one of the things in meditation that he had picked up from Anne was that she had done it sort of just to get our attention.
Mm-hmm.
Awareness.
Just so they, hey, I want to make sure you guys are paying attention. I'm here.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's another somewhat similar example. One of the persons who comes to our synchronicity blog off and on is named Charlie West, and she's somebody who lives in a house that's haunted. She has said that a number of times. And so this was one Thanksgiving, a few Thanksgivings ago. The family is all together, and they started talking about the spirits in the house, and then in a kind of jovial manner. And then Charlie's mother said, "Let's have a toast." And they all held up their wine glasses, and she says, "If there are any ghosts, let them make themselves be known." And suddenly, her mother's glass just exploded and shattered, and little pieces of the glass were all over the dining room table. That seemed like that's a synchronicity and a direct response.
That is a direct response to what's going on. It makes me, into my next question, because I'm sure people are kind of thinking this too. So is there anything that they should know about making connections with spirits that they should either do or not do before they get started?
Well, probably one of the things is if you approach it as a joke, you may get a trickster. A trickster spirit say, "Oh, okay, you think this is a joke," and then break wine glasses or something similar.
Yeah, so, there's a difference between ghosts and spirits, and what we're writing, first of all, the spirit contact in the media is generally portrayed as something negative, as something scary. Ghosts and hauntings and those sort of stories that we hear and watch on television and movies. But what we're doing is basically helping people make contact with lost loved ones. And so it's a whole different level. I mean, it's not something that we're talking about going to haunted houses and looking for ghosts. And ghosts are often just kind of a loop that's
residual energy.
Residual energy that isn't really resonant, isn't really there. It's just somehow left behind, repeating over and over the same, and totally unaware of you, and you might be somehow aware of it, but it's unaware of you. That's the difference between a ghost and a spirit, where a spirit is a conscious being, a conscious entity without a body that might appear to you as a globe of light, as my mother saw my father after his death. My mother was also in contact with my father through, she lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and in the winter we used to sit in one chair, and there was the window outside of his, by his chair was all frosted, and she was sitting in his chair and looked over, and the letters M-A-C, Mac, were visible in the frost, and that was his nickname. That's kind of cool.
That is just so amazing. And it's interesting how different things like that come together when we're willing to open up to that kind of communication with spirit.
Yeah. We found that with the advance of all this technology, spirits seem to be using it. This one friend of ours who lives in Oregon had recently lost her husband to brain cancer. And one day she was texting her daughter to come out to the house to go through all the stuff everybody had in the closets and the attic. And as she was texting them, she said she started to respond to her daughter Jill when the words "he loves you" typed out by itself on a line. And Nancy said to text her daughter, "I didn't type that. It was right in the middle of the thread, and I did not type it." And Jen, the daughter, says, "What?" Nancy says, "That just popped up on my thread. I didn't type that." And Jen says, "He loves us," because Rich, her husband, even if he was upstairs and she was downstairs, he would text her while they were in the house. So this was what I thought was a pretty direct example of spirit contact through texting of all things.
And electronics, yeah.
Electronics.
Yeah, we have another story like that, too. A woman who contacted us named Kira lost her oldest son in a car wreck. And oddly enough, his cell phone stayed charged for 2 years. And she kept going. She never plugged it in or anything. But occasionally she would just pick it up and turn it on just to listen to his voice, listen to his message. And after 2 years, near the 2-year anniversary of his death, it finally died. And she had said that she'd never heard of a cell phone staying charged by itself for so long.
Mine doesn't.
So then a few years later, his death was in 2011, and 5 years later, in 2016, both of her grown sons came to the house on the same day, which was rare because they have their own lives going on. One would come, the other would come at another time, but they both came. So she went on Facebook and said, "My boys are here. Again, we're together." And after she typed that, a Word file came up on her computer that with a poem that she had written years before. She doesn't know how that came up, but it was a poem based on a dream that she had of walking with her son, her dead son. And it was one of her favorite poems. And so that was very shocking to her and surprising. She showed her sons and said, "We're all here. All three of my sons are here."
So it could happen in almost any context, through virtually anything, through objects, through sense and sounds, through electronics. It just depends, basically it depends on what you do day to day in your own life. For people who are on computers, a lot it could happen through a text message or an email. If you drive around in your car, it could happen through music. If your radio is tuned to a particular dial.
White feathers as well are a symbol of contact. We've received a number of stories of people who are thinking about a lost loved one, and one particular story was with a man in
Mike Perry
in
the UK.
In the UK, right? That he was going to visit his daughter's grave, and this white feather just comes floating down from he doesn't know where, and just right right in front of him and his wife. And but that was just one of them.
Yeah, this is a period of 16 months. He lost 3 people: his daughter, his mother, and his closest friend of 30 years. And after his mom's death, he started seeing white feathers everywhere. And on one occasion, after his friend had died, he was just walking across the square in the town where he was, wondering if his friend was okay. And out of nowhere, a white feather appeared and dropped to his feet. So that was, it's like a white feather seems to be some sort of archetype, to use Jung's term for it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, these are just beautiful stories, and thank you for sharing them. My goodness. I mean, I could listen to those all day long, and I'm sure.
Me too.
And just hearing these different connections that take place, and and so it makes me curious. So why do spirits want to connect with us?
That's something we've asked ourselves a lot. Like, to give you an example, this morning, right before we called your show, I discovered that our landline wasn't working. And I thought, well, what is this? A misconnection? Is this a spirit trick?
Last night there was clearly a couple of calls came in on that line, but today, about 15 minutes before we were about to call you, we picked up the phone, and both of us were dead. So that's a little trickster synchronicity there. And
I don't know, maybe, I mean, I think sometimes spirits get in touch with, the families they've left behind, just to let them know they're okay and you don't have to grieve.
I think that's the main reason, is just recognition that we're okay, that you don't have to worry. Very rarely do they come back and provide great philosophical
or the lottery numbers. They don't do that.
Or treatises about what it's like on the other side. You don't get that. It's the basic thing is making contact to say we're okay. We're doing fine. Now, we've had stories, like we've mentioned, through family members and lost loved ones, but we've also had some ones that have occurred to us that came spontaneously from entities that we were unfamiliar with. And I'm thinking of one particular vacation we took to the Dominican Republic, where we had spirit contact on at least two different occasions. And the first one was we were staying at a resort near the beach, and we thought this was it looked great on the internet. This
wasn't a resort; it was an old hotel on a beach.
Right? Yeah. And the center of it we thought was this big garden, but when we got there, we discovered it was actually a graveyard. The 3-sided hotel was around a graveyard, and so on our porch we were overlooking the graveyard, and our daughter was about 12 years old, and that started really bothering her that, well, why are we just looking at these graves and we're sitting on the porch here? And so finally she complained so much, we went to the manager, and
they moved us.
They moved us to the side, but unfortunately our doorway was actually closer to the graveyard than the original one. But anyhow, one day the grave yard gate was open. So Trish and I just go walking in, and there's a grave digger, and he comes up, and Trish is from Venezuela, grew up in Venezuela, so she's fluent in Spanish, and he started talking to her about how he was digging to bury somebody and found another coffin down below, and he was explaining that in this area that the land keeps going up, the sand comes up and it rises up, so there's levels of graves all the way down, maybe 2 or 3. And he said, "You want to come and see this grave?" And we said no, we weren't interested. So I just happened to pick up a stone, stuck it in my pocket in the graveyard.
And interestingly, this was a windsurfing trip. And one of the first graves we saw in the graveyard was that of a 24-year-old windsurfer. And the rock that Rob picked up was close to his grave.
Right. And we thought this was an ancient cemetery at first, but then we walked in, and his gravestone is half of a bottom half, or the top half of a windsurfer's sticking upright, and he'd only died like 3 or 4 months earlier. So that was a little freaky. So for some reason, I picked up this stone, and then we moved to this other room. So that night, we went to bed fairly early. We were tired. Daughter was in the back sleeping, and we were in the front bedroom. And we both fell asleep. And suddenly, I heard this sound. It was like a wrecking ball hitting the side of the building. Boom, boom, boom. I sat up, and Trish sat up simultaneously. I said, "Did you hear that?" She said, "Yes." "What was that?" And it was something that was. It sounded so real, but yet there was something very unreal about it as well. It was
and something innervating. It was. Yeah. It wasn't threatening.
Not threatening at all. We felt charged from this experience. It wasn't frightening a bit. But and then the television was suddenly on. Why is the television on? We weren't watching television. So that was a fascinating experience. But in the morning, I took that rock and threw it back over the gate.
And I asked the clerk. I said, "Listen." Next day, I said, "Is your hotel haunted?" "Oh, yes." He says, "Our ghosts are simpatico. They're friendly." Well, I don't know about this one.
Yeah.
So that was a good story.
Yeah.
That was a good story of spirit contact.
That is a good story, and it's interesting just to hear how that continues to happen in your lives. And I love how you guys have your book, Secrets of Spirit Communication, that helps people make connections with spirit, if they're willing to do so. And we talked about signs, kind of like symbols, the white feathers coming down. What are some other kind of signs and symbols that you guys see, throughout your journey?
Really, spirits seem to use whatever is most convenient.
How about the pins?
Okay, yeah. This happened to me when I was in college, before I really understood what all this stuff was. Not that I do now, but at least now I know more. I was living with a woman whose grandmother had just died. And the grandmother, this was in upstate New York, the grandmother was a seamstress. So after the grandmother died, my roommate and I started finding straight pins all over the house, and neither one of us sewed. I mean, these straight pins were sticking out of chairs. They were, in flower pots, just in odd places. So I said to her, I said, "Linda, where are these straight pins coming from?" She goes, "Oh, it's my grandmother. She was a seamstress." Like, oh, okay. A couple weeks later, we went up to her mother's house, and she starts telling us how she's finding straight pins underlining passages in the Bible, in clothing, all kind of odd places where you don't normally find straight pins. Mm-hmm. And she also felt it was her mother, Linda's grandmother. Wow. 10 years later, we're at the fort. There's an old fort in St. Augustine that dates back to the 1800s. And, I mean, there's nothing in it. It's just all stone. You walk through and you can see things. I mean, you get a sense of the history of the place, but there's nothing in it, no furniture or nothing like that. So Linda and her mother and I are walking through this stone hallway, and all of a sudden her mother looks down. She goes, "Oh, my gosh, look, a straight pin." And Linda and I looked at each other and just started laughing. I mean, how absurd is that, a straight pin? And so we felt it was her grandmother was accompanying us on this little tour of the fort.
They just keep showing up, regardless where you guys go, right? So.
Yeah, right. That's the thing, some of these ways of contact persist over decades.
And usually there's something symbolic involved, too, like that straight pin was something related to the woman's pastime sewing. We have another story in the book of, it was actually a woman who we met at the dog park. Sometimes we just try to bring up the topic of spirit contact just to see if anybody has any interest in it. This woman did. Well, her husband had died a few months ago, and so that's why we had. Trish just said, "You had any contact with him?" And she looks at us and said, "Well," she said, and told us the story. He had always given her pennies and said, "This is a penny. Hang on to this penny. It's good luck." And he'd done that a number of times over the years. So after his death, she started finding pennies, which, you find pennies once in a while, but she found them in odd places.
suitcases and pockets,
on
clothing.
high on shelves, and it was just very surprising. And she also had his picture up, and at night before she went to bed, she would kiss her fingers and touch the picture, saying good night to him. But then, did she have a reading with somebody?
Yeah, I think she did. She had a reading with somebody.
Yeah, she had a reading with a psychic or medium, and what the medium got was, he wants to know why you no longer kiss the picture.
And because her walls had been painted.
Yeah, and
she had taken it down.
taken the picture down. So she said that was evidence for her that not only was that the woman was good, but that the spirit contact exists, and she was connected with him.
And I'm sure that's much more than why aren't you kissing the photo? It's like, hey, I'm watching over you. I'm here with
right.
you.
Yeah. It's not like he was angry.
No.
It was a point of contact. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we I'm here, and it brings people, because grief is a tough thing, and it seems that a lot of people are dealing with that right now in one shape or another. And so when we look at, when someone passes, being able to make that connection with them, I think it offers a lot of hope for people.
I think it does too. It offers comfort and also just an assurance that something of the person survives.
Mm-hmm.
So we've also had one experience that is similar to the movies and TV with the scary stuff. We were in Costa, Florida, which is a spiritualist community. Only about, I think, 250 or so people live there, and most of them are mediums. And it's this little town that was built just over past the turn of the 20th century, wood frame houses and Victorian houses, and there's hills and pine trees, which is unusual for Florida, which is mostly flat. So it's just going there into that atmosphere is always interesting and different. And there's an old Mediterranean hotel in Costa where people stay. And
we knew it was haunted.
Yeah, we had heard that. And so this was the first week of March, a number of years ago, or quite a few years ago, because our daughter was
a year old.
A year old,
a baby.
Yeah, a baby at the time. And the reason apparently that there was nobody there was that it was biker week in Daytona Beach, and all the tourists that were around went to Daytona Beach, was opposite side, or to the coast for biker week. And so Costa Diego, which is inland about 75 miles, was really empty. So we got a room on the second floor, and we stayed up late that night. And our daughter was sleeping. There was two beds. Our daughter was sleeping in one of them, and we were reading. And suddenly we hear this clomping sound, like heavy, heavy boots just coming down the hallway.
Up the stairs first.
Yeah, up the stairs and then down the hall towards us. And each step was just
it reverberated.
Yeah,
I mean, it was jarring.
And we went to the door, and we had many other experiences, all that we weren't afraid of spirits, but this one was different. There was something just cold and angry and fierce and frightening on whatever was out there. It kept clomping down, came right to our doors.
Wait, you have to tell what we did. We got so freaked out. We pushed the dresser in front of the door. We pushed the dresser. Like that would keep a ghost out.
But the door handle actually moved, which was scary.
Rattled.
It rattled.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just. And Trish grabbed Megan off the bed and was holding her. And
I was ready to climb out a window.
Yeah, it was a frightening experience. And then then finally it just. The last thing I wanted to do was open that door to invite whatever was out there in, because it was not good.
Yeah, and the next day I asked the guy at the desk, I said, was anybody staying here last night? He said, no, just you guys. And so I told him what had happened. He goes, oh, that's probably, and he named some spirit apparently that's been seen there. So
that they're used to having there. Well, and I know, oh my gosh, I mean, there's all sorts of different kind of spirit communication. When we talk also about like communication with animals, you know, what does that look like?
Boy, that's pretty common, especially with birds. One of the stories in here that gave birth to the cover with the robins on the cover. It's a long story, though. I just encourage people, buy the book, read Sharon Catley's story about the cardinals.
Yeah.
But one of my personal experiences with animals, we had a cat named Tiger Lily, and she was 12, 13 years old, and she was ailing. And one day I realized that she couldn't eat anymore. She was starving to death. So I thought, okay, I need to do the thing that no pet owner ever wants to do. So I put her in a cart, drove over to the vet's office, and of course, through sobs and tears, they finally understood what I was saying. And so this tech vet comes up to me and he says, one of the vet techs, he said, look, first we're going to give her a shot that sedates her, and then we'll put her to sleep. So I stayed with her while they did that. And he goes, you know, it's really weird. He says, it's her name. I said, why? He said, well, last week, somebody brought in 2 kittens, one of which had been attacked by some sort of hawk or some sort of bird, and they had to amputate the cat's back leg. And he says, and we named her Tiger Lily. Now, what are the odds of this? My cat's name was Tiger Lily. His was Tiger. And not Tiger, not Lily, not Tiger Lil, you know what I mean? And spelled the same way. And so I just kind of stood there in shock and said, wow, that's an uplifting coincidence. And he said, they come and they leave. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like it was Tiger Lily saying goodbye to me.
Yeah, being able to, you know, let you know it's like, hey, you know, have that connection, you know, with somebody and have that discussion, and that it's going to be okay.
Yeah. So I think, you know, and we have another story in the book that happened to an Australian who, when he lost his black and white cat, Sylvester, he drove out in a field near his house, and he had the radio on in his car. And as he was digging a hole, Peter Gabriel's song, Digging in the Dirt, came on. He was so shocked. He just kind of stood up and he said, what are the odds? You know, what are the odds that this kind of synchronicity would happen while I'm burying my cat?
Yeah. Yeah, that you'd hear those kind of things. And it, you know, and it's interesting. I mean, at the time that these things happen, it doesn't seem like, you know, it's hard to put those pieces together. But, you know, as time passes, it's easier to go, gosh, okay, I remember how all this came together, you know, for, you know, my dog or my cat or whatever
right.
I have. Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, for him, the recognition of what it was immediate because he was right in the midst of digging in the dirt, just like the song said. Mm-hmm. You know.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you know, my dog Maxwell, he passed away, you know, it was probably like 4 or 5 months ago, and every once in a while he comes to visit, and I can tell because when I go to sleep, I can feel him hop on the bed.
Yep, yeah, that's common.
Right, yeah.
Yep, I love it when that happens.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sign for sure. For sure. Well, and you know, it kind of, gosh, you know, we've talked about so much, and we've covered so much. I think it would be interesting to discuss. I know in your book you talk about shamanism and as a path for spiritual communication, and I'd like to know just your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a big topic.
Well, I guess I left a big one there, huh?
Well,
well, you know, why did you choose shamanism?
Well, shamanism is essentially the first religion of the world. It dates back at least 10,000 years, where humans were interested in spirit contact and making contact, and they're usually the people who became shamans were people who had some issues in their life. Shamans are usually not happy campers. They might have had a near-death experience or have some disability, but they had this ability, and they're still shamans that do, to make contact. And in fact, the reason I wrote about it is that shamanism has made a big comeback in the last several decades in Western psychology, and there's a lot of different shamanic workshops for people to go to. I went to one for a 4-day one out in Arizona, Chaco Canyon, and where we were walking every day. We walked all day, and then we had rituals in the evening, and we had fire ceremonies, and we had a quest where we go up in the rocks in the middle of the night and wait for a contact. And I had a very interesting spirit contact during that. It was about 28 degrees. I'm coming from Florida, and I'm freezing up there in these rocks and in the dark by myself. Everybody had kind of divided into different areas. And so I'm tired, and I'm in this drowsy, half awake, half asleep state when I see these 3 Native Americans walking along this ridge across from me. It's like across the canyon, and there's like a very narrow trail they're following up high. And I'm watching them, and the third one, the one behind, suddenly turns and stares at me across the canyon, and suddenly, instantly soars across the canyon right at me, and I jerked up and come fully awake, and so it seemed so real, very startling experience, and I was told the next day that that being was out to kill your ego. That was his quest. I guess he didn't do it very well.
The nerve.
Oh, that's classic. Well, it's so interesting because, I mean, there is a real big movement for shamanism right now. And so I was very curious, how it was, what your guys' thoughts and feelings on it. So I'm so glad that you were able to share that with us, and we were able to talk about that.
Yeah. It seems like wherever we've gone in foreign countries, we always look for the places that have the weird stuff. When we went to Cuba in 2017, and on Sundays the Cubans have this massive celebration with the santeros and santeras who are still alive and well on the island. And, that also is a form of shamanism, where because they communicate with spirits, they do readings through spiritual guides.
Yeah, the
Santeria.
Santeria is a syncretism between the ancient Yoruba spirit religion and Catholicism. It's a blending of the two. So they work with the Catholic saints, and they are each related to a Yoruba god. So it's a fascinating.
And we went on our honeymoon. We ended up on an island in Chile called Chiloé, where the traditional people all believe in mermaids and ghost ships. In particular, this ghost ship, the Caleuche, that comes into this lagoon and is manned by men in black. It's just every culture has its myths and legends that are just fascinating. And a lot of them involve spirits.
Yeah, it's interesting how deeply ingrained spirits and spirit communication is in all cultures. It's something that's just not, been around for a few hundred years. It's been around for thousands. Mm-hmm. And I loved how your book, Secrets of Spirit Communication, really made it easy for people who are wanting to discover what that would look like for them. If they're wanting to connect with maybe a lost loved one or a pet or a friend or what have you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Sometimes like one day I was going through some old photos and found some pictures from when my family, my sister, my parents and I lived in them as well. So I was writing to my sister about these photos I found, and suddenly outside my office window, 2 cardinals appeared. And I thought, okay, I don't think I'd ever seen cardinals outside this particular window on this particular bush. And they just hung around, and then they left. And I thought it was my parents.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. You gotta love
Yeah, I mean,
that.
because you always have to look at what you're doing at the moment you experience it, too.
Yeah, what we try to do is just be aware of the many different ways that spirit can make contact. For example, an object might disappear and reappear at other locations. How did that get there? Or a clock stops working at the time of death of a loved one, or alternately, a clock starts working that had been owned by the deceased person that hadn't been functioning, or you see a reflection in a mirror window of a face that isn't physically present, just something passing like that, or lights coming on a TV or a radio or some electronic device comes on when you're talking about a lost loved one. Things like this happen. An object that's of significance to the deceased, such as a book falls off a shelf when you're thinking about that person.
Or you experience, for instance, a cluster of numbers. Clusters of dates and numbers are also important, I think, with spirit communication. Where you see the same numbers on clocks, cell phones, microwaves, like 11, 111, 333. Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways. Yeah. We actually had trouble narrowing the information we've got.
Oh, I'm sure.
We've been collecting stories for years. Just on our blog for 7 or 8 years now.
9 years.
9 years. Okay, I'm behind. So it's been a great resource for us for writing several books, actually.
Yeah, being able to have that information, that discussion going back and forth, and people reaching out to you, it is interesting. And the story about the text messages that you told earlier, love that. Yeah. Absolutely love that, because most people wouldn't think that spirit's going to text message me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But we kind of laugh about it, but it makes sense. Everybody's on their phone all the time, or laptops or the computer, the iPads.
Years ago, back I think in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, somebody wrote a book called Telephone Calls from the Dead. Yeah. And a lot of people made fun of that book. But now, we're just beyond the telephone. Now everybody's walking around with their telephone and looking at it all day, and making, with the electronic and the digital world, there's so many different methods now that they could come through. And electronic voice communication, where this is something that people have done for years as well, manipulating radios between stations and hearing voices. And there's been several books written about that, and there's little devices that are available you can buy for making this kind of electronic contact. So, it's all something that some people are very skeptical about, and it's controversial, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it is very, very interesting. And gosh, both of you, Trish and Rob, your book, Secrets of Spirit Communication, absolutely loved it. I thought you guys did a brilliant job on that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
We have a blog that we post on every other day or so. It's called blog at, let's see, what is it called? blog.synchrosecrets.com.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best place.
If you just Google Synchro Secrets, SYNCHRO Secrets, it'll lead you're right to it.
Yeah, and we love to hear stories. So give us more about all these stories. They help people because this kind of stuff happens to people from every background, every ethnicity, every religious. It's just there are no boundaries. It can happen to anybody, anywhere.
Yeah. Well, and I love that because, spirit doesn't, like you're saying, doesn't know any boundaries. It's just,
no.
No one person can be excluded from having spirit contact if they choose to pay attention and have it.
Exactly.
Yep.
And even sometimes when we're not paying attention.
That's true. And that's when the synchronicities are particularly powerful. It's like, hey, pay attention.
Well, Trish and Rob, thank you both so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We enjoyed it.
Thank you, Trish and Rob. My goodness, you guys are such great authors. I can't wait to see your next book. My goodness, Secrets of Spirit Communication is just a phenomenal read. I'm sure everyone wants to pick up their own copy. And they're available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and of course, all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.